Welcome to the International Teacher Podcast with your host, Matt the Family Guy, Kent the Cat Guy, Jacqueline from JP Mint, and Greg the Single Guy, bringing you episodes from around the world about the best kept secret in education. You've got it, international teaching. Welcome to the show. Let me have a sip of tea here for a second.
Wait a second.
Oh, Ellen's going to bring us in.
All right, you're on, Ellen.
Hi, my name is Ellen, and I'm a college counselor being interviewed today on the International Teacher Podcast.
Woo! Well done. Thank you, Ellen.
Hey, welcome, Ellen.
We have all three of us here
Ellen.
today. We've got Greg the cat guy. No, I'm Greg the Single Guy. And in the Middle East, we've got Kent the cat guy in the Middle East, and JP is in Mexico. And Ellen, you are coming to us currently from Daka, Bangladesh. You're our first guest on here from Bangladesh, so thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Ooh, that's exciting. Lots of firsts. First college counselor, first time a guest has been in Bangladesh.
Yay!
And the first time I think I've ever heard a guest
That's a big
introduce
first.
the podcast.
One more first.
There we go, Ellen.
Hey, four things. This is the first
You
time
got a
Greg's worn pants to the
trifecta.
podcast.
That's
so
true.
can
And
we
a
just
shirt. I'm
celebrate
not naked.
every victory
Well,
today?
I'm really interested. Ellen, you are a college counselor in a K through 12 school, but let's get into that a little bit. Can you give us the elevator version of what brought you to Bangladesh?
Yeah, I was really fortunate to go to the University of Northern Iowa. I'm an Iowa native, and I went to the University of Northern Iowa, which you may know as the university that hosts the UNI Teachers Fair and has for many, many numbers of years. It was at one point the only nonprofit, I think, international teaching fair, and I was fortunate to not have to travel to Iowa. I was already in Iowa. So really from the time that I was in the teaching program at UNI, I always had my sights set on being able to do teaching abroad, and I got to do that with my student teaching abroad in Vienna, Austria. And from there, I then took a year off. Actually worked in a boarding school and then went back to get my master's degree. And after that, went back to the UNI fair, got my first teaching job in Taiwan, Nigeria, Guinea, Turkey, back to Taiwan, and then I've been in Daka for the last 4 years during the COVID pandemic.
Did you mean Guinea, Turkey, or is that a city in Turkey, or is it Guinea, the country?
West Africa, Guinea,
Oh, yes,
Conakry,
Guinea.
Guinea. Yep.
Ah, wow, you've been a lot of places.
Just curious, did you overlap with JP Mint in any of those countries?
No, I didn't.
Well, then how do you know
Don't believe so.
JP?
You're the first guest we had
That's
that
true.
have not
In the
overlapped
80
with
episodes,
JP
everyone knows
Mint.
JP.
No, we...
What's it? Do you want to tell us, Ellen, just a little bit about being a counselor, a college counselor? We're very curious. None of us have met in person a college counselor or gone to college, so this will be awesome. Tell us a little bit about your job.
I'm a school counselor, but I'm fortunate to work in a school that is a university preparation, international high school. And so they do have a dedicated person who works as the university counselor, university careers counselor is the name we're updating it to, as well as having a social emotional counselor in the secondary division. And so this allows a young person or a family multiple people at the school that they could talk to about, I'm not sure what I want to do with my life. Well, I get to work on programming with students, help with the course selection. I get to teach weekly because I initially was a teacher, humanities, English as a second language or additional language, and then now college counseling. So I call myself a teaching counselor. I really do like to have a weekly time that I get to check in with students. But then a lot of it is also on the back end, helping with the application process, schmoozing with university reps to make sure they know about my school and also my country. And that's been one of the really exciting things about being in Bangladesh is it's an emerging market for universities in international destinations. There's a lot of students coming out of Bangladesh for graduate and undergraduate degree. I really work with the undergraduate students. Universities in Bangladesh, there's some strong ones, but there's also a lot of us students that aspire to go outside and start their post-secondary education outside. So I really like what I get to do because it's different every day.
I have never met anybody that works as a college counselor Has it been difficult for you to find schools to work for? It doesn't sound like you've been everywhere or a lot of places.
For some of my first roles were in English, but each school I've had, they've either had a secondary high
I
school
see.
counselor.
Okay.
That's typically what we see in the U.S. Is in the U.S. or in Canada, is that there is a social emotional counselor. But the rates in the United States, according to the American School Counseling Association, California and I think Wisconsin have some of the highest rates. One college counselor, one school-based counselor is responsible for everything related to counseling, and they may have a caseload of as many as 900 students to one counselor. And so that's a reason for, why did you guys leave your home countries to go work abroad? That's a really realistic reason why some qualified educators in the US may say, I really like to try my hand at working with a smaller number of students, or, if they've worked with international populations in the United States, I've worked with a lot of Spanish speaking students. Let me see where some of these students are coming from. And then find themselves in a different destination just to explore.
I'm from Wisconsin, so you can tell that I'm a prime example of one of those crazy students that never had the benefit of having an social emotional counselor. I've been dealing with that for years, Jokes aside, though, I think that that's really cool that you cross over between both. Like, you're not just helping to find schools, but you're helping them to get through those difficult years, because there's a lot of transformation that goes on there.
Ellen, I'm curious, if I'm a college counselor in the United States, 90% of my students are going to go to one of the 3 local universities in my state. Here you are at an
Community
here
college
you are
as
at an
well.
international
Yep.
school, and students might go to college in the host country in Bangladesh. They might go to the U.S. They might go to Korea or Japan. How in the world do you handle advising students to go to universities anywhere in the world?
Yep, that's a great question. And I think this is where the network that I found in college counseling is exponentially more connected and more active. It's very typical that if you're in a country, there's already an established network, or if not, that's one of the first things you want to do is you want to find out who's doing what I'm doing at other schools, because generally the counselor is really like a solo kind of role. If you're a 4th grade teacher, you can talk to a 3rd grade teacher. If you're a high school English teacher, you probably connect with your humanities colleagues or, the other languages at school. But as a counselor at your school, you may be a solo. I'm fortunate to work at a school with 2 counselors in my building. So I work closely with my social emotional colleague, and then we also have a primary counselor there as well. But the role of college counseling, this world of interconnectivity, I can't imagine what it would have been like 50 years ago.
Yeah, without internet. Yeah.
You would have had a Rolodex. A Rolodex of all the names of the presidents of the different universities you'd have to write a letter to.
So now universities are visiting. We've got regional reps oftentimes because we're near India that come from India. University reps from the US, from the UK, from Australia. They'll typically come over on a trip where maybe they're visiting their regions, Nepal, Pakistan, India, and traveling elsewhere. And so it's really exciting to get to have visitors on campus and to get to introduce those visitors. And one of the things, a good slogan I heard recently was, it's hard to be a prophet in your own lands. It's hard to be a messenger and for you to be telling the students, this is what's needed. This is what universities are looking for. It really helps when you bring in sort of a guest speaker or a person directly part of that admissions process at a university to speak about their university. But also my students are usually interested about what's the difference between, I'm looking at the US, but the UK has 3-year honors degrees. Why, convince me of that. Students also typically ask people that are coming from North America things about safety, things about the cost of housing if they decide to go to Canada. And as the Greater Toronto Area, Vancouver, these places are becoming really expensive. And so it's also a great opportunity to sort of live some of those values that we usually promote in international schools, where we're trying to help students become global-minded, world citizens, critical thinkers. I really like that a part of my role is facilitating those visits when those universities come to promote their schools and institutions.
Anybody got a question?
No, you go
All right.
ahead.
So,
You
Ellen,
got it. You
you
got
know,
it.
one thing we've learned in the United States is that some parents and families will put a lot of pressure on the process of finding a college and university, including up to the point of, paying off admissions counselors at colleges. What is that like for you to have to not only assist and work with the students, but families as well who might put a lot of pressure on that process?
First of all, I'd like to say this is one of the things I really enjoy about my job. I'm not the final decider. If a student or a family says they want to apply to a particular university, I can help that student through that process. But the decision is not up to me. The decision as to whether they get admitted or whether they get a sufficient financial aid package is out of my hands. My purpose is really just to make sure the student understands the process. That if they need to get connected with the university resources, I can do that connection. But when we're working with a population that may be able to, as you say, they may have wealth, they may have social capital, they may have a lot of means in their home country to get what they want. In the university process, unless it's a very extreme case where somebody's purchasing a library. Also, you can't purchase a library the year that the student wants to go to that university. It's something that has to be done much more well in advance. I've worked with some very affluent students, and so that's one of the things I like about my job. I can support you to do what you want, but let's instead identify universities and destinations that are what we call a good fit. And I think the concept of fit, when we're encouraging students to look at universities in locations with climate that match what they want to live through for the next 4 years, is something we also do in our own when we're searching for our own international destinations and international teaching careers. What's going to work for us may be beyond our own expectations or our initial ideas.
Ellen, when I went to college, I went to University of Wisconsin, a small little 2,000.
12 of the best years of your life.
Years. Yeah, exactly. So it was amazing because one of my fraternity brothers, his name was Rajesh Kapadia. We called him Boogie because no one could ever say his name. He was from Daka, Bangladesh, and he was a top 1%er of that culture. So his parents could afford a really expensive overseas experience. But I always wondered, how did he ever end up in little Appleton, Wisconsin, right? And it's really cool to hear that there are people like you that are on their side trying to find the right fit, not just looking up in an encyclopedia of colleges of the United States, but finding the right curriculum, their right major for them, their interests, and all that kind of stuff. That's how a lot of these international students are getting to universities, right? And there's a lot of diversity that these universities want to get students from overseas because it looks good on the resume of that university too.
Yeah. I just had my students attend a visa session hosted by our local U.S. Embassy. And that was one of the kind of plugs that the consular officer said was, why does the United States want students from this country? And to be honest, it's business. There is that element. International students, as you said, sometimes do pay an exorbitant cost, much higher, but also a lot of students are looking for significant amounts of tuition, significant amounts of financial aid to lower the cost of that tuition. And that's one of the things I notice. Oftentimes my students are granted scholarship where they may be able to pay a domestic rate, similar to what I'd be paying as well. I would say many of my families that I work with, they're already in a private school, so they're paying a significant high school, secondary school tuition. So these parents have planned well in advance the opportunity for their student, especially if they're a first generation student, to go abroad. This can be life-changing for a family's economic situation to have their child go abroad, study an English education, first of all, and then have the necessary skills and qualifications to go abroad, and then bring that knowledge back to Bangladesh. But on the other end, the U.S. is also very much, U.S. and other the universities that host international students benefit greatly. You might not have known anybody or anyone from Bangladesh before, and so you benefited as a domestic student. Universities really enjoy study abroad programs for domestic students because it gives the students from the US a worldview and an opportunity to go abroad. But not every student will acquire a passport and will want to or have the means to go abroad. So hosting international students at the home
Opens
country,
that up.
opens up the world. I'd say the same thing. I first learned and got to know other international students by being a conversation partner. That was a program that my university hosted because we did have an intensive English program. And so I got to meet students from China, from Poland, from Saudi Arabia, from Turkey, and many other countries that I've then since later traveled to, and in some cases gotten to meet abroad. So it's very much opened up my worldview. But had I never traveled, I still would have learned about a number of different countries, cultures, languages, religions, while being a university student.
So can you tell us also, Ellen, how much do you need to know about the lay of the land when you arrive? Because I would also think, I know for a fact that in Mexico here, there are a lot of the Mexican students that are going to international schools are wanting to stay domestic. They don't want to necessarily travel abroad for university. So how much do you need to know about all the universities available in the country where you're living in?
That's a great question. It's going to vary based on where you are, but I do think a good college counselor in the role will be learning about the local university system. Recently, one of my colleagues in my city hosted a university visit to one of our nearby private universities because that year there was a student that was interested. And so that counselor was doing their legwork to then learn about that other university. And so that's, I think similar, it's similar to a primary teacher who may have a new student in their class or may even be moving to the country. Maybe you don't have to learn all of the local language, but knowing a little bit to help make that student more comfortable is just something that generally a globally minded, compassionate, educator will do. Like, let me learn something about you so that I can help you in the learning process. I think that's the initial kind of intention that college counselors have. I'm fortunate to work with a local college counseling assistant who has been to university in that country. I spend some of my free time getting to know professors. I was a former Fulbright grantee, and so I connected with other Fulbright grantees in the country and then got into the university and visited their campus that way. And so I think it's, you do your homework. You end up needing to do your homework. And in my time, in my 4 years here, I've only had 2 students who've decided to stay local, but I was prepared for that and had resources to reach out to. Oftentimes in college counseling, I don't have to know the answer, but I do need to say, let me get back to you.
How big is your school right now that you're at, Ellen?
Great question. I'm really fortunate to work with small classes of between 20 and 45 students. And so that means at a time I have 45 students, but oftentimes in international schools, if a caseload is larger, there may be 2 college counselors, or maybe you'll have a part-time teacher, part-time counselor. I'm really fortunate to get to work with small students because I like to help them with as much of the process as I can.
So just to clarify, you're not talking about a classroom of 45 students. You're talking about a grade level? So grade 12, or is that 11 and 12?
A cohort. No, that's my total cohort right now is 20 and 45. Yeah, small school.
I thought it was like 45 kids per square inch there.
That's typical in maybe a larger school. And some of my colleagues work like that. And when they do, that also allows them to specialize. So I have some colleagues that if you're looking at an engineering pathway and you're taking your upper level 11th and 12th grade DP or 12th, 13 A levels, then you work with the college counselor that's dedicated to engineering, or you're working with the college counselor that's dedicated to sending you into medical programs. Larger schools can allow for a lot more facilitation. I'm a one-stop shop trying to support students as much as I can. And I also do use the teachers as well, because the reality is 100% of the students, 100% of the people that I work with have been to universities. That's one of the first things I do is I survey teachers and I say, who would like to share your college and your career history? So that I found out I have a lawyer on our faculty. When I have students that are interested in law, hey, I encourage you to go talk to the English teacher who also has studied and received a law degree. Talk to the science teacher who considered medical school before becoming a science teacher. And so there's a lot of resource right there at school, and others I can find. I'm looking for an architect right now to connect my students with, for example. Nobody on my staff has pursued a degree or worked in architecture before, but I can find it.
Ellen, I have a question for you. Let's talk about maybe the sons and daughters of the international teachers who maybe they've been overseas most of the life of that young student, and all of a sudden they're going to what the parents would call a local university, but for these kids, it's like going abroad to school. They got no idea what it's like to be a student. What kind of conversation would you maybe have with that student who's like, Miss Ellen, I've never been to this school in Canada. What's that going to be like? Or this school in the United States? What is that like talking to these students?
Yeah, you're asking about maybe what we might call a third culture kid. I think there's new and updated terms for them. But yeah, I had a student from the Philippines. She'd grown up abroad, had been with her family for the last 4 or 5 years in Daka, and then was looking at where to go. Considered studying abroad and did work on the applications to go abroad, but in the end was likely headed back to the home country. That student had to be prepared to transition to the language. She would be required to speak some local language, and it was a Catholic established university, and so had some kind of American style 4 years. So there were things like general education, and there was something about Filipino history and culture that I understood that she had to go back to. So in that case, the student was very fortunate to have close family back in the home country. Financial aid is also another piece that typically we discuss with my faculty families, and also being able to acquire the visa. And so one of the things I did over my winter break was I visited branch campuses in the Middle East. And so I started in Qatar, and in Qatar, there's branch campuses. So a student can go to Georgetown, a student can go to Carnegie Mellon, as well as Northwestern. And so these are much smaller campuses. They have a couple of very focused programs. For example, Northwestern has a journalism program right there in Qatar. And for some of my families, that is closer for them, maybe not close to the home country, but closer to where they could study while the family remains abroad and overseas. Qatar in the UAE, Abu Dhabi, NYU campus, as well as the RIT, Rochester Institute of Technology, right there in Dubai. These are American diploma issuing universities, and it's easier in some cases for families to get visas if they're not American, Canadian, British nationals.
And what are we talking for cost too? Would the cost be a little bit lower because these are in the Middle East?
Great question. Sometimes, yes, it is. I know that Rochester Institute of Technology is a fraction of the cost, whereas rather than if the student had gone back to Rochester, also just the climate is significantly colder with that winter that I'm not sure that all my students would be able to weather if they haven't grown up in it. But I do know the branch campuses in Qatar, the two that I visited, they do charge the same amount of tuition. So it's something to consider. Also just factoring in the cost for the family to visit. It's just a direct flight from Bangladesh to Dhaka, or from Dhaka to Dubai, or Dhaka to Qatar. And so that's not part of a financial aid package always, but it is something that the families are considering. Post-COVID especially, proximity to their families, and the pandemic was a real eye-opener for families. Maybe we don't want our children to go so far away. And so Malaysia is another destination which has a number of branch campuses. So these are UK campuses in many cases.
So I have a great question for you, and this is just in general. We don't have to be specific, but can you give us an example of like one of those horror stories? Like, is there like a good day, bad day for you? There's got to be like that puzzle,
like a cultural question. Is that what you're looking for?
I don't think it's a horror story, but I have had students that have approached me, and the idea isn't that they're just going to college, but they and their family are going to college. And so not a horror story. It's just a different type of reality. Yeah. Yep. And so a young man who was moving to the United States and would also be applying was looking the ideal. I love it when a student is geographically flexible and says, I'm willing to go to places and states that I haven't heard of before. because that is where perhaps there's better programs. We can secure more financial aid in different destinations. A lot of my students want to go where they have family. And again, post-COVID, that makes a lot of sense. That student was admitted into schools, further west and was open to that idea, but understood that that was not going to be a good fit for his mother that would be traveling with him. And so, again, not a horror story, but just a different type of reality. Yeah.
Different. Yeah. Like going from Daka, which is millions and millions and millions of people, and then landing in like a little podunk town in Oregon or something like that at a specialty school. I can imagine
I
that.
will write the apology letter to Oregon and all of its
Well, I mean,
podunk
just going from
towns.
population difference. And you're right. I like what you said about family, because it's
Exactly.
not just the student that's going. It's when your son or daughter goes to college, you're going to visit on campus, etc. I can't imagine going from somewhere like Daka. And if you're from Japan and you're living in Daka and your son or daughter goes to Oregon or goes to Wisconsin, in a tiny little town like Appleton, where the student body's 2,000, the town is based around that university or that college, and there's nothing there. That would be a huge cultural adaptation for the kid, because the student's not going to have a whole lot to do outside of school, right? I've been there before in a small
Yep.
town, college town. There's nothing to do except be at college. And you're like,
Yep.
I miss the big city.
And again, that goes back to that fit. What are you really interested in? A lot of my students and families are interested in Brown because of the name and because of the recognition. But then Rhode Island, is that really a place that you want to live? Is that really, there's
yes.
beautiful aspects to it. But yeah, for a young person who's only ever grown up in a major city, I've had students admitted, but then they've opted to go elsewhere, likely
Backed out.
to
Yeah.
to an equally prestigious university. But that fit is where we don't just want the name and the recognition. We also want community. We want to be able to find our extracurriculars as a university student and as an international educator. Something that's difficult about, getting kids to consider the Midwest is the flights. And, if it's not a direct flight, or being from the
And it's
Midwest,
the Midwest.
it's
Hey, now.
really difficult when you
Hey,
get
now.
dropped in Chicago and your onward flight to Iowa or Appleton is canceled and you have to sleep in the airport. That's something that I've had to do in my 20s and my 30s. It could be exceptionally difficult if that's the arrival experience for a tender 18-year-old who's traveled with family.
And you landed at UNI, and you landed that tiny
Waterloo.
little airport, which I know a lot of our listeners,
Cedar
our
Rapids?
listeners have been
Cedar
to UNI.
Rapids.
You landed that tiny little airport, and you're surrounded by farms, and it's wintertime, and there's
Not to mention all those Jell-O salads at the potluck. Like, that's just awkward, because if you haven't had a Jell-O salad before, you don't know what to do
Hey,
with this.
with lots of
When
mayonnaise,
I
it's
was
important.
I got to work in grad school as within our international program, and I remember ordering food for banquets and things like that, or having a potluck and there's pork present. And I just remember a lot of times I would then stand beside that dish and just remind our students who were, from Muslim countries, like, this is pork, this is pork, this is pork. Yeah.
It's haram.
Yeah.
It's haram.
And
Don't
so
eat it.
Choose
I
wisely.
really like it when I have a geographically flexible student, but post-COVID, I completely understand if a family says we want to send our child within proximity to family. And that's also a great post-COVID question to ask university representatives when I do on-campus visits or when representatives come to us, is say, we're done with COVID. We hope we're done with COVID. However, how did your campus respond to COVID? What happened to the international students who couldn't just get back on a plane and travel back home? Maybe because they didn't have the funds. What kind of funds did the university release to international students? And there are some campuses that really just shut down operations and said, you need to go home. There were stories of international students who were paying out for Airbnbs because their residence halls closed. And then I know, for example, Boston University was able to really get themselves prepared, They kept students on campus. They were building
Wow.
technology to get testing out and about. And so that's a great question, that even though we're no longer, thinking about
There's still
COVID,
a threat.
how did
Yeah.
the university respond? It's an indicator question to let me and the students know that international students at that university were supported, or it was just, sorry, we can't help you during this time.
Ellen, let me get your opinion on something. The future of counseling in general. You say that you work with someone who's an SEL, and you work with, it feels like, and feel free to give me the real picture. It feels slightly devalued in the sense that more and more counselors are acting as substitutes. More and more counselors are being questioned on just their desire to help the mental well-being of students and to assist them. What is the future bright? Is it at a turning point? What's your opinion?
That's a great question and a complex question. Having worked in a number of countries where there's quite a stigma associated with counseling in general, I've had students that have said, my parents don't believe in this. They don't believe in counseling. And I'm quick to say, okay, let's call it coaching. Let's call it advising. And I used an analogy of imagine an athlete, like an Olympic athlete. They have a coach that talks to them about nutrition. They have a coach, and that's something in a school context. Sometimes we talk about, if students aren't feeling well, what are they eating? We have a cafe on campus. How much caffeine are we consuming? Let's start to talk about a little bit about that. Sleep. One of the number one things that I feel like, especially our students that are working on an IB curriculum or really rigorous high school classes, is you start to see around exam times that student who's pulling an all-nighter. It's not in college. They're doing it in high school now. Yeah.
High school.
And just talking about, from a coaching perspective, let's just talk about what impact this may be having, or how this might be affecting you at school. I don't have to be a counselor for the sake of a counselor. If you're not comfortable with talking to a counselor, we have homeroom advisors as well. And those are teachers, the students, again, small classes that they get to know. So that's one of the things. If there's a concern, I might say to a student, I'm noticing something. Let's see who you can talk to. And you can talk to the social emotional counselor if you'd like to talk to me, because it might be having an impact on their school. This is academic advising. Let's have you talk to somebody. They don't have to talk to me for the sake of talking to me, or a counselor. There's other helping adults at school. And then the role would be supporting that teacher if they have, further concerns. And so I think your question is valid. And it has to do a lot with where you are and how the school represents and presents counselors. I will say that I'll step in and I'll sub a class to help out my principal at a time, but I see it as an opportunity for face-to-face time with the students. I teach a seminar to students so that I have that face-to-face time. If we're talking about a response to intervention and RTI model, that's a level 1 intervention that all the students get. I want time with groups of students, as well as having some time with small groups and individuals. But I am fortunate to work in a role where I don't have to be a part-time teacher, part-time counselor. And I'll continue to look for roles like that now that I have the experience that I have.
All right, let's take a moment for a little commercial about how to get in touch with us. You can, of course, find all 4 of us at the itpexpat.com. That's www.itpexpat.com.
Or you could also find us at email at internationalteacherpodcast@gmail.com. We look forward to hearing from you.
Or if you're into Facebook, we have a new Facebook group at www.facebook.com/groups/ITPexpat, where you can find all kinds of inside information about ITP Expat.
You can also find us on Instagram at ITPXpats. That's with an S. ITPXpats is our handle.
All right, and thank you, listeners. We have over 100 countries represented by our listeners, and though we're not monetized, we are here for you, and we would like to thank all of you for listening. So let's get back to the show.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but it feels like more and more that counseling department is growing in international schools, maybe in light of the fact that we've just coming out of a pandemic where they're realizing the mental well-being of their student population is becoming key to their success. And so they're expanding their counseling departments. Have you seen something like that?
Yeah, when I went out and did my job search, I was looking mostly for dedicated college counseling, but sometimes they'll have a comprehensive counselor who does both the social, they'll work with a smaller group of student, like I'm working through the A through F students, and then there's another counselor to handle G through. So that's more of a comprehensive model, like what I would typically see in the United States. They have to do everything, the college, the career, the social emotional, the academic. So I looked at those jobs as well, but I also saw wellness or well-being coordinators. There was one school in Southeast Asia. It looked like they were looking for a counselor for their faculty. And that's also an additional piece. One of the things we're trained to do in counseling is to kind of like stay in our lane and know when and how to refer. Similar in teaching, right? Unless you're a primary classroom teacher, you kind of, it's secondary, you kind of have your area of expertise and you allow the science teacher to teach science if you're the humanities kind of person, right? Similar in counseling. We're supposed to know sort of the limits of our professionalism. We don't offer in schools long-term, really deep, intensive therapy because we have a caseload of the entire, the rest of the school. And so when we have referral services, and we do have some in Bangladesh, but we don't have the amount of services that we could refer our faculty to, parents to. And so sometimes parents will be referred or will be recommended to talk to the counselor, and we can get them started, but oftentimes it's time to refer that person to somebody outside the school. Similar with colleagues. And this is where I think it's really important for international teachers to be familiar with their insurance plan that they're hopefully provided with, what sort of counseling, mental health services might be there. I think even within the schools that I've been in, that's something that I'd like to see more of is, can you talk to, okay, it's great that I have emergency care and it's great that I can get a doctor's checkup, but does my health insurance plan that's provided by my employer allow me to visit a counselor? Is it 5 visits? What happens after that?
I've got something to piggyback on that. There's an episode that we did, and it was episode 68 of the International Teacher Podcast. Anna is a psychologist, certified psychologist. She deals with staff and faculty that they're not diagnosed or anything, right? But they're going through problems. So she is an international teacher / professional psychologist to work with staff, and you can do a video conference with her. She's totally cool about it. You get online with her, and she's so easy to talk to. Her website is enhancedwellbeing.org/teachers. And she's offered on our show too that she's the one to go to. If I'm having major problems, I don't have to go sit on the couch of my elementary counselor. She's too busy, right? I can call up Anna and I can deal with all these international stresses that we know about. She knows about what a stress for international teachers. She's in Hanoi right now, but she does internationally. That's her shingle. That's that website, the way to reach out and help international teachers and admin to get through their times.
I have a friend that's actually one of her clients. One of my international teacher friends told me about Anna, and I said, wait a second, I think we just interviewed her on ITP. So that's how small the world is.
I know, because I went into my counselor my counselor came in during COVID to unload. It's like she came and sat down on my couch in my classroom. And she's like, oh my God, Greg, and started crying. I'm like, you can get through it. You can get through it. Wait a minute. Why am I telling you this? Right? You must have to go to a counselor too. Do you go to somebody?
It's helpful to have those resources. And I think that's one of the great things that's that's coming out of this. And if you do, it's helpful to talk about it, even with students. And we don't have to tell students, that we see a particular, psychologist or counselor, but to say, when I'm struggling with something, it's really helpful that I have somebody to talk to. And so that's another part of the college transition that to help students understand is to look for some of those well-being resources at their university. If you go to a university in the United States, students have access to a counselor, and hopefully they have a really good response rate, that a student can get an appointment rather quickly. Students have access to that gym. They have access to a healthcare clinic on campus. And that can be really beneficial to, some of my students. And one of the things I want them to know as they're transitioning, make sure you reach out, because a little bit different in a high school. If a student is struggling, a counselor might reach out to you. In university, it's not likely that that's going to happen. And so ensuring that the students know. I was just having a conversation with another school counselor, and that was one of the lessons that she was doing with students, just to make sure that they understood. One of the differences as you transition, and it's similar with us as adults, it's not like our principal is going to say, it looks like you're having a hard time, so here, I'd like to refer you to somebody. We have to be doing that for ourselves, and it can be helpful to have that resource to share with your other colleagues and say, I noticed you're struggling with something. If you'd like to talk to somebody, I'm going to put this number right here. I think we can really help one another out. If we're more open with these conversations.
Yeah, right. Just before we wind down a little bit, just a quick question for you, Ellen. For the ITP crowd that might know almost nothing about Bangladesh, is there a book or a movie or anything? I hate to put you on the spot, but is there anything our listeners can turn to just get a glimpse out of the country that you live in?
Check your clothing. Check your tags on your clothing. So much of the clothing that we wear is made and manufactured in Bangladesh. And so he's checking a shirt now. I can see there's gobs of Bangladeshis that are living abroad. That was one of the first resources I turned to when I saw that there was a job. Talk about fit. I saw there was a job in Bangladesh. I saw that it was my focus, my career. So many times I get, why Bangladesh? The pollution is horrible. Why Bangladesh? Unfortunately, a lot of the images, there's a Netflix movie, that I could say it's an action film, but it shows the country in such a poor light. It shows the poverty. It shows the pollution. It shows dirty, but there's so much more to that. I really liked the last episode where you had the episode I listened to where I think it was Kim who traveled to over 300 days. She said, I visited Bangladesh, and very few people would actually take a holiday or tour Bangladesh. Most of the travelers, she's right, most of the travelers that are here, they're here because they have to for work. They work in aid. They work in garment, they work in manufacturing. Now we're seeing a larger, for the last few years, we've been seeing a larger number of people who work with the Rohingya population. They're not seeing, I would say in most cases, if you just come to Dhaka, you see a really polluted city. But outside of Dhaka, this is the land of the Bengal tiger. This is the land that has wonderful honey.
Oh, the beekeepers. Like they go up and they get the honey off of the cliffs.
There's also an area like that in Bangladesh as well. And so beautiful rivers.
Wow.
It's a land of rivers. And so I would say the best contact would be somebody. That was who I first reached out to, was somebody from Bangladesh, and said, tell me more about it. I think that's going to be the best source, because if you Google it, you're going to see more reasons maybe not to come than reasons to find and enjoy.
And remind our listeners how many years you've been in Bangladesh.
This is my 4th year. It was a great place to be. My school was, all things considered, a great place to be during COVID. We got paid. We had very large apartments to sort of do our quarantine in. My first year, I spent counseling students online. I never got to meet with them until I went and visited some of them on their campuses in the United States, and that was a wonderful experience. The second year was hybrid. My 3rd year was in person. My 4th year, there was a little bit of online during a presidential election or a prime minister of a political election. 4 years. I'm really proud of myself for sticking it out this long. I will be sad when it's time for me to go.
And it sounds like you are going then. Is this the end of the era?
Yes, I am on my way to Germany. Really looking forward to a different region, a different scene. But there's some cost associated with that. In Bangladesh, we are paid generally pretty well. I have a large furnished apartment. Things are going to be different in Germany, but I'm really looking forward to, after 4 years of being here, I am looking forward to more access to nature, hiking, biking, and a little bit of a smaller city to sort of calm down for a couple of years after this.
What language do they speak in Bangladesh generally, like the main language?
Great question, and a good opportunity to plug Mother Tongue Day. So Bangladesh, during a period of occupation, had a conflict over its language, and its people wanted to be able to speak its mother tongue, which is Bangla. Similar to Bengali out of India, there's some similarity within the region, but Bangla, Bangla, which is why the country is pronounced typically Bangladesh instead of Bangladesh, because it's not Bengali, it's Bangla. And so in February, each year, Mother Tongue Day, which your schools may also recognize, it was recognized by the United Nations. And so that's where we get Mother Tongue from. It's actually because Bangladesh, fought a war over its ability to, for its people to speak its language.
Ausgezeichnet. You're going to have to learn that word. Or
I'm working on it.
Krankenwagen now. Because, I mean, even you're going from Bangla to German, and that's going to be a big change for you. I'm excited that you're going to Germany. I'm not excited because you're leaving Bangladesh. Bangladesh. I would like to go visit Bangladesh. I'm going to go visit Boogie, my friend. It's not
wonderful
like you
hospitality.
Said, yeah,
wonderful hospitality.
Place to go and get out of the city. You said get out of the city, go see the rivers and all the beautiful stuff that's out there.
Sundarbans, Bandarbans. Cox's Bazar has the longest continuous sea line coast beachfront. Beautiful, beautiful place to be. But it is a country, be forewarned, it's a country where it's very difficult to access alcohol. And if you do, it comes at a very premium cost. So it's typical. I've had university reps say, I tried to order a bottle of wine and it was going to cost me $200. My advice is to bring your purchases with you from duty free from the previous, not in the Daka airport, from in your previous flight, or just take a break, see it as a dry holiday.
I was going to say, so now that we know you're transitioning to I think you said Bonn, right?
Germany. Yep.
So
yes.
What will 3 things that you need to either have with you or once you've landed, what are 3 things you will need to make that transition?
More socks. The climate. Bangladesh is warm year round. There's a couple weeks of cool winter. I've been living in, sort of subtropical regions. It is the world's clothing factory. But yeah, I'm having to sort of update my wardrobe. People do bike in Bangladesh and Dhaka in the city. It's a little too rough for me, but I'll be getting a bike once I arrive in Germany. Also, the rain gear that goes with that. I understand that the weather can be quite shifty, and so there'll be wonderful public transportation, but I'll get a bike. Yeah, to do commuter biking as well as, some pleasure riding.
Kent, you got our second question.
Rain gear.
Rain gear. He's not a very good listener, is he?
Oh, no, yeah. Well, no, I counted socks and bike. Was there one? was there? Oh, and rain gear. Oh, I'm the one who can't count. I'm sorry. No, I'm not. Welcome to the International Teacher Podcast. I'm Kent. Thank you for joining us. Okay, so I'll ask the second question. Police story, custom story, anything you want to share with the ITP crowd where you tangled with the local authorities that you could tell on the air?
Yeah, I think I've been held in at least 3 different settings. Once was between when I was student teaching in Austria, I went across the border. I think it was over to Hungary, and on the train, police were checking for the right documentation, and I didn't carry my passport with me as a silly sort of student visa. But this is where I think you always know a guy. And so I had someone in the community, I was able to kind of pick up the phone, and he said at the time, with the new Schengen agreements, or, at the time he said, you'll be fine. And so learned a little bit of lesson there about carrying documentation. In China, going between Shenzhen and that SEZ, that special economic zone, going between Shenzhen and somewhere in Guangzhou. Again, you just trust. It was when I was a student, There were others in the group that were really uncomfortable, and the way they demonstrated their uncomfortableness was kind of to make it a joke. And if you're in front of Chinese police and you're not really sure what's going on, it's best to just be respectful.
Silent. Don't be jokey.
Yeah,
no joking.
exactly. So in that case, I think I wasn't fearful of the Chinese security. I was more so, concerned about my peers who just really
The
weren't
expats.
taking
That's
it.
who I'm always worried about.
Student travelers who weren't taking it seriously. So I think when you're going to some places, it is really important to pick your travel partners wisely.
That will be the title of this episode. Choose your travelers wisely.
Don't travel with Kent.
I've watched enough episodes of Locked Up Abroad that you can go party, but I don't want to be picked up, at the airport, for a drug bust. And so choose your party wisely.
Officer, I swear that's a flute. It's a flute in my suitcase. That's what Ken always has to say.
Broken Down Palace? That was like a Claire Danes. I think I watched that really early on. And I think I've always had a very healthy fear or a healthy skepticism about traveling. I've kept my nose clean during my time. And then when I was living in Guinea, also held up by security, called the director, who was able to sort of get us out of the situation. I had my documentation. Somebody else didn't, but there was a fear of if we gave our documentation over, they might take it, sort of hold it ransom.
You wouldn't get it
So
back.
I think,
Yep.
choose your paths wisely. I think I am really good at knowing different directions and how to get around different checkpoints. And I walk a lot when I'm in a city, or I take local transport. I don't just have a driver take me around. And I think that's given me a good head for, sort of how to keep it safe on the streets.
And you stop at all the stoplights in Iowa too, don't you?
Sure.
Ellen, why did I know you would have a few stories for us? And those, I'm sure you have more that you have in reserve for the future. That'll be for the Patreon account, for the Patreons.
For our Patreon.
We'll hear Ellen's real police story. Hey, Ellen, you are such a gem. I'm so excited for the time that you have left in Bangladesh. And I hope that we can reach out and find out how life is in Germany for you. Is there any final thoughts you would like to share with the ITP crowd?
Yeah, I think one of the great things we have is just to be really open-minded about destinations. If you're just starting out, or if you've been a teacher in your home country for a while and you're looking for something new, just be open to destinations that you may never have heard of. I've lived in at least 3 places that Guinea, I would say Nigeria, and Bangladesh as well. These are not countries that people would say typically travel to. It gives me great stories. It's a great thing to connect with. When you tell people, I've already found a Bangladeshi community in Bonn, in that city. And so I'll be able to carry on, a little bit of the experience if I want to. And so I think just being open to new places and new destinations it can be life-changing in this role. And if you can do it for 2, 3, 4 years, why not? And maybe just not avoid, but look beyond the main top destinations that probably everybody wants to go to. There can be financial incentives, there can be great friendships formed and great community created. When you can't necessarily find that community, you end up having to create it. And I think that's one of the things I've done in my sort of out there destinations, is created community that otherwise I couldn't expect to find.
Awesome. JP, final thoughts?
Very, very wise words. I absolutely agree. I think when you go for the unexpected, you will be happily surprised.
Single guy?
I'm just trying to get over the story about get held up on the train trying to go over, into another country. It's sort of, I'm excited about having you on our show, talking about the college application stuff and social emotional learning. We haven't had a lot of guests like that, so thank you so much.
Once again, you've done it here at ITP, bringing you the world one guest at a time. I would like to thank Ellen from Bangladesh. Thank you so much for joining us today, Ellen. I would like to thank JP Mint at jpmintconsulting.com. I would also like to thank Greg, the single guy, Lemoine. You can find his newest book, International Teaching, The Best Kept Secret in Education, at www.amazon.com or wherever you find your finer books. I'm Kent the Cat Guy, and you can find me in the staff lounge sneaking that last piece of pie. We'll see you all next time.
All right, that was awesome. I love that.
Great job. Ellen, you are great.